y'all. So we're back with Deep Images, and tonight we had this idea to do something called, I just called it alternative sci-fi film. Originally, I called it alternative sci-fi cinema, but since the last like 5 of our shows have ended with the word cinema, let's change it up a little. It's less for me to type when I make the thumbnails. So, alternative sci-fi films. So let me just quickly define how we are applying that phrase. So basically, I'm not going to list them all, but basically, there's a lump of franchises that everyone watching knows. May not have seen all of them, but I'll name a few so you get the drift. Star Wars, Star Trek, Terminator, Matrix, Planet of the Apes. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. And see, I'm not even going into how many, all of them. Avatar, all these giant multi-sequel franchises. Now we have covered, and I Am Legend, include that. And we're like, all that's too mainstream for what I wanted to do with this idea. And that's not a snobbery. I'm not trying to be punk rock and purist by any means. It's just, let's do it. That's something different, Did have someone associated with the podcast who had a real problem with it, but that person's a fading memory. So the thing is, I and some of them we covered anyway. I mean, when we did Post-Apocalypse, we did a huge Planet of the Apes thing that we all contributed to, and it did really well. The next time we did a huge Richard Matheson, I Am Legend, all the adaptations one that we all contributed to, it did great too. So it's not like we won't ever do something like that. It's just there's, and I'm trying to avoid Marvel, and I want to apologize to the MCU haters who I know a lot of subscribers in the past have told me that they don't like it and they don't watch those. I don't know how they feel now. Sorry, I did Werewolf by Night, but it just totally fit the theme. Same with Echo. If it's a genre thing that's not an overt superhero thing, and I like it and can talk about it in a way that the fan bros aren't talking about it, we're going to do it. Otherwise, we are not going to do any MCU and DCEU or any of that stuff from ever, and but that doesn't mean we're never ever going to talk about comic books or
as I wear a Marvel shirt, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, because almost everyone on here is into comic books in some level or another. So that's a pool of knowledge you want to tap into. A former producer of this show told me yesterday that, most of us only knew about comic books, and it was stupid. He hates comic books. Again, this person is no longer in my orbit. I'm not saying these people are not in my orbit because they said these one things, but when people bring negative energy into your project, you have to get rid of it. It's just the way it is. It's nothing personal. It's just, we want to have fun. We want to create and enjoy things, and we don't have time to fight with anybody. We barely have time to record everything. We keep running out of time. This will probably not be an epic length one. A few people called out sick, and that happens. So including Kaylin, that's the one y'all probably noticed the most is not here. My co-producer, and but her girlfriend's mom died, I think. So they're going into taking some grief time, and that's fine, so no problem. Bill Mulligan could not make it because of some film related project he's doing this weekend, but he told me 2 weeks ago. So we've been mapping this out, and we've had a lot of fun finding entries that we each like that aren't too mainstream, that are have maybe a too high a concept. They bombed first time around, but they're worth assessing. Super obscure, but just great movies or fun movies that are part of, like, say, knockoff trends like Italy was so famous for. And those are our basic parameters. If I missed any parameters, y'all throw one in there. But I'm going to start out with Justin. He's going to do a foreign one that is still pretty overlooked, even though its maker is world famous. And Justin's from that neck of the universe. So go for it.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Yeah, it's not foreign for me, but and it reminds me a lot of growing up in New Zealand as well, because it was set in 1987. The year of the film was 1987. The director is Peter Jackson, who is known for Lord of the Rings. I think his first film, or one of his first
It was his
films,
first feature
um,
film. Yeah.
first feature film, and it was filmed over a long period of time, I'm told. So, which is why the sky or the weather seems to change slightly throughout the film, is because they took about 6 months to film it, and they managed to get offal and blood and guts from the local freezing works.
Wow.
It's set in the countryside in a sort of a beach town, which looks like any New Zealand beach town with the batches and beach houses. And the main protagonists or guys who form part of the anti-alien squad are all very dinky typical New Zealand guys from that era. The interesting thing is Peter Jackson inserts himself in as an actor, so he's a producer and director, but he also plays two parts in the film. He's Derek, and also Peter Jackson, as we recognize him with longer hair, also plays a character called Robert, who's one of the aliens. So yeah, there's a brief intro at the start which says that an alien ship has been spotted or attacks in the local countryside. So a government department sends an organization called AIDS, AIDS, which stands for the Astral Investigation Defense Squad.
And this is a
So it's very
1990s movie, so that's quite an audacious joke.
It's kind of non-PC, 1987
Oh
film,
well,
yeah. So
you know, it's aged
quick-
well.
there's quirky little
Yeah.
things like that in there. And these old cars that I remember growing up as well in New Zealand before they had so many Japanese imports. There was these old Ford Cortinas and British cars as well on the road, so Morris Minors and so forth. So it's interesting seeing the cars. At one's crazy scene near the end, a sheep gets blown up by a rocket launcher, which I thought was a nice touch as well. Because when I grew up in New Zealand in the 80s, there was something like 50 million sheep and only 3.5 million people. So I think the ratio's changed slightly.
When you were growing up, did they used to just blow up sheep with rocket launchers? Was that common in New Zealand boyhood life, or? I hope so.
Well, not with rocket launchers, but there's Australians like to tell some other joke about what New Zealanders do with sheep. But
Oh well,
I've heard that one, but we'll wait for the adult episode for that one.
yeah. Deep
The number
Images
of
After
sheep-
Dark. It'll be for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, deep into After Dark.
It might be a sign of the times, but the number of sheep now is only like 20 million in New Zealand, so it's gone down by about 2/3. But
Well, it's really the housing market for sheep has been so bad, they've just been moving out in droves. So, they're all living in Hawaii and, and all these other places.
They're
And
moving.
so I don't blame them there.
There's also an unexplained phenomenon thing associated with that, but it's too involved. I'll tell y'all sometime. If you don't know it, it's real interesting and it's all true. But Justin, real quick, so tell us about Derek and tell us about the aliens.
Well, the aliens take on human form. You see them in their alien form towards the end, and they look like these sort of baboon type characters with their ass hanging out of their back of their pants and these big bulbous heads. But for 90% of the film, they take on human shape in the form of these men wearing pale blue button-up shirts and blue jeans. And Peter Jackson is one of the aliens, sort of does this crazy lurch when he's walking around. And as Derek, he's got short hair. I didn't even know it was Derek. It was actually, I thought it could be Peter Jackson, but it was only when the credits came up that I realized it was actually him. But Derek, he's got one good line which says, "I don't run because I'm a Derek." But he falls off a cliff and the back of his head skull breaks open and some of the brain comes out. And so he has to strap the back, stop the back of his head falling out. And after that, he's a bit of an insane character who grabs a chainsaw towards the end and helps to kill the aliens. But his friends, erstwhile friends, get the impression he would probably turn on them as well. So he does survive, but at the end, the house is actually doubling as a rocket ship, and it takes off with the leader of the aliens on the rocket ship. but there's a very Derek jumps on top of the alien with a chainsaw and basically works his way with the chainsaw through from the head down to the groin area and comes out the bottom and says, "I've been reborn." And then he turns the spacecraft around and apparently is headed back towards Earth. So, and he says, "I'm coming to get you, bastards." So it's almost like it's left its way open for a sequel at the end.
Yeah. Let me say real
But
quick, Justin, you've got a little bit of technical difficulties occasionally. So just
yeah,
people watching, just be patient like us, and I'll let you know if you have to repeat something. But so far, it's just a temporary delay. So go ahead.
yeah, I think it's because I'm coming in from home. If I'm at the office, it's not such an issue. But yeah, every now and again it freezes slightly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So another very quirky scene is where the Peter Jackson alien character Robert throws up this green slime type substance into a bowl, a custard bowl, and then it's passed around the aliens who then consume this substance. And one of the protagonists is undercover as an alien at that time, and he's slowly working his way to the back of the queue because the last thing he wants to do is consume this substance.
The gruel.
But at the end he actually does partake in it, and then for whatever reason wants more of it. So he manages to avoid giving himself away. So that was another scene that stood out of its quirkiness. But look, just an overall impression. It was just crazy. With a lot of ketchup and I think real offal from the freezing works, and crazy 1980s, late 80s special effects. So it's not the sort of horror violence that shocks you. It's more comical, if you will, and it's very graphic, which I think is what Peter Jackson enjoys.
Yeah.
But it's certainly
used to
don't
enjoy.
expect.
Yeah.
Don't expect a serious sci-fi film. It's obviously comedy sci-fi
With horror, sort of.
Yeah.
But I suspect people in America will probably benefit from subtitles. There's lots of New Zealand slang in there, and the accents are quite thick.
I've always said the movie reminds me of like Jackass with aliens in it. That's kind of the vibe that I get from that movie.
Well, it's just so incredible how he founded that WETA then, and they did all the effects in-house themselves until finally they signed with New Line to do the Lord of the Rings, which came out of nowhere. No one, even Peter Jackson, expected to get that gig. And that WETA Hollywood gave WETA, the Weinsteins gave them the facilities to make WETA into a big thing, and now they do special effects for other movies down under that are genre. But I've seen a documentary about Bad Taste that was on the Anchor Bay DVD, and it's incredible how much work he put into it. And
two films I recommend just before he made it big with Lord of the Rings would be The Frighteners in his hometown of Wellington, with Michael J. Fox, which is sort of a ghost, a kind of a comical ghost story. But then there's also there's the Heavenly Creatures, which is Kate Winslet, maybe one of her first roles,
Melanie Lynch,
based on a true story of murders in the 1950s in Christchurch. So that was a really good film as well, actually. Yeah.
Did you know,
very different?
Did you know that's a remake too?
I didn't know it was a remake.
It's a remake of the 70s European film Don't Deliver Us from Evil, which has starting to become very known among cult horror fans, and it came out on Blu-ray, and I've seen it a couple of times, like bootlegs. I mean that it's much more extreme and graphic. I mean, the girls are meaner in general than they are in the Jackson version, but I've read that it's closer to real life than the Jackson version. The Jackson version concentrated on two things: the kind of fantasy world they made together, where he could show that world of fantasy in her mind, in Melanie Linsky's mind, and then the lesbian aspect of it. The original, since it's European in the 70s, having a lesbian aspect was not even remotely unusual, or shocking. But they went more into how blasphemous they were at one point. I mean, not just against their parents, but like against the anti-clerical. So it has a little touch of the 70s satanic movies. But after you see both of them, Heavenly Creatures is definitely an uncredited remake, though I have read a quote from Peter Jackson since I saw Don't Deliver Us from Evil, where he does say, yeah, I made that movie based on the same case. The case was just it was in our part of the world, and it was world famous, and I thought it was fascinating. I wanted to get in, do a little more realistic and psychological version. So I saw that in the theater, and I thought it was incredible. I love Meet the Feebles. I think that's
You
his
guys have
epic.
actually seen. Yeah,
You've
yeah,
seen
that's
it?
good too.
Meet the Feebles. They're
Yeah,
they're
in the
slowly.
90s, I saw.
Well, he's slowly getting towards putting out Bad Taste, Dead Again, or whatever it's called, Dead Alive, and Meet the Feebles on Blu-ray, and they're going to be really packed. But seriously, Meet the Feebles is one of my favorite movies. I've watched it many times. I think it's subversive as hell. I think it's offensive as hell, but I also think it's hilarious because it's a parody of the Muppet Show. It's like, what if the Muppets were real people and acted like real people, including drug and sex and violence and things like that. So if any of y'all haven't seen it, it's pretty essential to see at least once.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I loved Bad Taste. My roommate rented it in the early '90s, and we watched it like 3 or 4 times then, and I've seen it once.
It has kind of an Evil Dead vibe, I think, too, in terms of how they do a lot of like the effects and just kind of the zany
Yeah,
tone and that very homemade and that kind of thing.
Well, some of the concepts, even though they may not gross out everybody, some of the concepts, like Justin said, that are graphic are pretty disgusting. And like a guy desperately strapping his own brain back into his head, that's scary. Like, what if that was one of us? That would be like totally fucked up beyond the pale. Um, and yeah, the gruel wasn't pleasant either. But so do you have any other
yeah, I
comments?
liked gruel scenes. There was something similar in another. Yeah, there was some similar gruel scene, custard scene on that level of grossness in this later film he did called Brain Dead,
Yeah,
which is probably 1995. So that was another film not long before he did Lord of the Rings, 5 years before he did Lord of the Rings.
see
So
oh, go ahead.
if you get hold of that one, that's
Absolutely.
recommended as well.
Well, it in America it was known as Dead Alive, and it was cut by quite a lot, and it was a video nasty, if I'm pretty sure, and Blockbuster was really unhappy with it, so they cut a whole bunch of it out, and that's the only way you could see it for years. And finally, somebody I knew had a bootleg, probably around 1999, 2000. I saw Brain Dead, the real movie. Not to be confused with
Yeah.
the other kind of bizarre horror movie called Brain Dead that came out earlier, but yeah, those three: Bad Taste, Brain Dead, Meet the Feebles, supposedly on Blu-ray, maybe this year.
Yeah, check them out. Okay, so that's basically it. I didn't get a
Okay.
chance, sorry, Henry, to watch a second film, but that's not because I mainly know mainstream sci-fi. But
It's
yeah,
okay.
I think that's a good one to talk about anyway for me.
Yeah, we're gonna get back to you to talk about something else related
Yep,
though.
sure.
But next, we're gonna go to Richard Reynolds over here.
Okay. Well, the film I chose, I thought about the concept. I liked the idea we're moving beyond franchise science fiction because franchise has just taken over the whole science fiction cinema. There basically are very few science fiction films that come out that aren't part of a greater franchise like Star Trek, Star Wars, or whatever. But when I was young, in the 60s and 70s, those franchise films were more like the anomaly. Like Planet of the Apes is the only one I can really think of.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, we didn't really have a lot of those series films, and the emphasis in science fiction cinema was pretty cerebral. After 2001 hit, most of the studios, if they were backing a science fiction project, it was going to be something that was a little more cerebral, a little more thought out. Sometimes special effects were a key, sometimes they weren't. There were a lot of science fiction films that took place in the near future, things like Soylent Green and things like that. But ZARDOZ is the film I'm doing by John Boorman, 1975. And if you know John Borman's career, it's been up and down and all around, and he's done a lot of different kinds of things like Excalibur and Beyond Rangoon. I guess that's probably the last film I saw by
I
him.
think my favorite by him is Zardoz, but then Point Blank to me is just I've watched
I haven't seen that
I've
one.
watched it over and over and over.
Yeah.
I never get tired of Point Blank.
I'm one of the few people that actually loves his Exorcist 2.
It's
Yeah.
okay.
For some
I
reason.
don't hate it.
Yeah, it's just such a wacky movie, but I feel like John Borman's one of the few people that could actually pull that off.
I'm going to do a deep dive into the Exorcist films because a friend of mine said you need to watch them all because it's an experience.
I don't know about
But
all
anyway-
that, but
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that franchise is just everywhere.
because
All-
the
many
continuity
hands.
broke. The continuity broke after 3.
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
anyway-
but go ahead. What's the? Yeah, we'll talk about
Back to
that another time.
Zardoz.
Zardoz.
Zardoz came out in 1975. And interestingly enough, speaking of Peter Jackson, John Borman was wanting to do The Lord of the Rings. And for various reasons, it didn't get made. So he said, well, I still want to do something science fictional, something fantastical. So he came up with the concept of Zardoz. And originally, Zardoz was going to be set in the very, very near future and had more to do with a girl that disappeared into commune life. So the original treatment was very different than what they ended up with. And what they ended up with was, I think, it's not just a guilty pleasure. I'm actually an advocate for this film because I
Oh, me
really
too.
like this film.
Yeah, I do too.
And many people, I'm pretty sure I had a girlfriend break up with me because I made her watch Zardoz. That's how hated it.
I can
hated this
believe
film.
that. I can believe
But anyway, Zardoz is set, I think, a couple of 100 years in the future. And back when it first came out in the 70s, there was a lot of buzz about it. You'd see the posters for Zardoz with the big head, and occasionally see a still of Sean Connery as Zed in his unitard thong thing that he wears in that film with the knee-high boots. If you haven't seen Zardoz, I'm sure you've seen a meme based on Zardoz on Facebook.
And he
It's
has
pretty.
he has a toupee, but what's cool about it is then he has it in a long ponytail.
Ponytail, yeah. So a lot of the film these days we were familiar with some of the imagery, but back when it was coming out, it was like there was a lot of buzz about it. And then when it came out, the reviews were pretty bad. It got really bad reviews. It was considered to be incomprehensible and mostly just bad reviews. And I actually was happy to catch it on very edited on like the CBS late night movie.
Oh, wow.
And I watched it and I kind of liked it. I didn't quite know what to make of it. Granted, this is all pre-Star Wars, so science fiction expectations weren't necessarily space battles and shoot 'em ups.
Mm-hmm.
But then finally I got a hold of the unedited copy when it came out on video, and I just fell in love with the film. I think it's interesting that the first concept I had of it as a younger person was different than the one it ended up with, having watched it in the 21st century. And I'll talk about that in a minute.
I'll be right back.
The brief synopsis of the film is you're in the future, 200 years in the future, and society is broken up into two distinct castes. You have the Eternals, who basically live forever. They have a really controlled society, controlled by it's called a tabernacle, which is an AI that basically guides their whole life, keeps them immortal, and they live kind of a chosen agrarian lifestyle, where they spend a lot of time baking bread and doing basket weaving and real kind of hippy dippy kind of things, but they're all bored out of their fucking minds. They're completely, the men are all impotent, and society on that end of it is everyone's just really, really bored. Everything's controlled, everyone's bored. Then on the other hand, you have what they call the brutals, which are living in a like tribal society outside of the controlled area is called the vortex, I believe. And they live really, hand to mouth, brutal kind of barbarian existences. And Sean Connery plays a character called Zed, and he's what do they call? I can't remember what that, but he's basically like a cop or like a knight in that society, and he there's this giant floating head of this god called ZARDOZ, and it goes around and it lands in front of the Brutals and it says, "The gun is good, the penis is bad," and it vomits out all these guns and things for everybody. That catchphrase was a big catchphrase with me and my friends back in the 90s. The gun is good and the penis is bad. So yeah, I won't give you a totally detailed synopsis. I want everyone to watch the film. But basically the head comes down, Zed gets inside of the head and it travels back to the vortex where the rich hippies live. And the whole arc of the story is Zed is in, the vortex with them, and he sees their society. So we see that end of the world through his eyes. But he becomes involved with Charlotte Rampling, who's, amazingly beautiful in this film. And it turns out I won't give too many spoilers, but basically Zed is not what he appears, and Zardoz is not what he appears. Zardoz is basically a corruption of the Wizard of Oz. And one of the Eternals, through boredom, has decided to kind of shake things up by having a breeding program to produce a super intelligent Brutal. But a lot of the people in the vortex, they become catatonic because they get so bored they become catatonic. And if you,
I've been there.
Yeah.
Hopefully not during my synopsis.
No, you're great. No, you're great.
I have a tendency to ramble.
We're
No,
feeling
you're fine,
eternal.
you're fine.
Thank you. But they if they commit an infraction, the AI makes them age. That's how you're punished. So basically, people that commit crimes are just living this eternal senility. But the film is really good. And what I was going to point out, first time I saw it, I thought this is a cool, interesting dystopian vision of the future. Now watching it in the 21st century, I'm saying this is like Washington State, where I live. You have this little skinny area that's like the vortex where all these essentially rich hippies live, and they can do whatever they want to. They can, open up an organic bakery. They can, they have the funding to live these like really kind of deliberately,
They use hemp for everything and
use hemp for everything and brag about it. Then you you travel 5 miles west, and these are people that are living, like in these, meth infested, burned out small towns. They're basically just collecting guns and shooting at things. And, so interestingly enough, I feel like, Borman predicted a lot of what's going on right now. There are elements of it. So it's a critique of a feat leftist thinking in Britain at the time.
do you believe do you believe it's a class satire?
Absolutely is.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot of class satire there. I haven't really read too much about what Borman was doing with this. I read, reviews back in the day, but they didn't really go into what he was thinking and such. So many of you might know more about it than I do.
I don't know it, but it reminds me, or seemed very on the same level as Huxley's Brave New World, and Zed being much like the savage John, and that being the eyes into this class system, that's manipulative, because you got to keep them separate. Otherwise, what's the point of class, right? If you can't have a privileged class.
Well, if you keep the happy hippie class that way, and then you keep the indigent, angry people that way, then they won't reunite and overthrow the rulers of the world. And
but then they're so fascinated by the savage,
right? Exactly.
so you have to have that aberration there. Right. The intelligent savage becomes the the fascination there.
Well,
as a person that moved from Arkansas to the West Coast, I can really I can identify.
Wow, yeah. Oh wow, yeah. Well, I think one of the primary through lines of cerebral sci-fi, especially, I won't say all science fiction, because I think some of it, especially like stuff in the 50s, which I like, but I don't think a lot of those get it. Those are more like creature feature types of things. But I mean, look at the majority of great humanistic sci-fi. Most of it is class struggle. Even what I'm going to talk about kind of gets into that a little bit. So it's interesting you bring those points up, because I can see that in a lot of different sci-fi movies, especially the 60s and 70s.
I'd like to mention a movie real quick. At the dawn, I think it came out at the dawn of the 60s, either 59 or 60. And Bill Mulligan covered it on an early episode. It's one of my favorites of that period. Creation of the Humanoids.
Yep.
And that is definitely about
seen that.
class and
I just watched
racism.
that recently.
That movie was very subversive. You know, it was not marketed as what the vibe really is.
Yeah. Me and my boyfriend watch a lot of like 50s, 60s, 70s sci-fi together, and sometimes he introduces me to things I've never seen before, I've never heard of. And at the time, and this was literally maybe about like a month ago, we watched Creation of the Humanoids, and I had never seen it, but yeah, it was a very, very interesting.
When I finally
Is
saw
that
it,
an American film?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an American.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I've not seen that one.
I think it was totally independent at the time.
Yeah. It's probably on YouTube for free. It's kind of like there's a lot of like in bad shape copies, so you can probably just watch it.
It came out on DVD as a partner with Invasion of the Bee Girls of all movies. So
and I love that movie too. Yeah,
I do too. We're talking then another era there, the 70s. But,
well, Tim, be careful showing your boyfriend Zardoz. He might leave you.
He
does
actually
destroy
likes
marriages.
He actually likes Zardoz, although not quite as much as some of the 70s stuff. But Zardoz is a favorite kind of in our house. Of that
I love it.
Well, I literally just watched it maybe 3-4 weeks ago with my son, who's never seen it before, and he's late 20s, and he was wanting to watch it. No, he wanted to watch it. He knew he'd heard of it for so long. He finally wanted to watch it. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll sit down and watch it with you.
I have Go ahead.
Zardoz is for me another reason I like it a lot, because it came out 2 years before Star Wars hit. And that was like flipping a switch. And my ultimate point, one point I'll make is that for me it's my favorite Sean Connery role other than Bond. Because I think he's really good in this. And his career was in a lull, and originally Burt Reynolds was going to be Zed.
I could see that.
And it's funny because I actually think
Yeah.
That picture of Sean Connery that you see is that like
Looks
everybody
like
shares. Looks like Burt Reynolds, which is kind of interesting.
From what I recall, and I may be wrong, the Burt Reynolds only wasn't in it because he got sick, I think. And so they had to start filming, and Sean Connery got it. And yeah, that outfit, that's one reason why it's a little tight on him, because it was actually designed for Bert's body. In
between Zardoz and Star Wars, you have Logan's Run, which is kind of like,
I love that.
I love
getting into there. I thought about covering that. Would you consider that a franchise? Because
no, I would not cover that. It's too mainstream.
I don't consider that mainstream because it's pretty much forgotten. Then that's my way of approaching it.
See, I
it's
don't
pretty much
watched
forgotten.
a year or so.
See, I don't agree with you, Keith, because the DVD sells well. Kids know it by name, and everybody I know knows it by name. And I mean, I'm not like trying to be like, oh, Mr. Cool here, but I personally knew George Clayton Johnson, and I was friends with William F. Nolan, so I've talked to them both inside out about it. And it was a big deal when it came out.
At the time it was very
at the time.
Comic books,
that's
a TV series.
But I don't think it's
at
forgotten.
the time.
I don't think that's just my opinion. It's one that I would say no.
I would say up until
yes.
Yeah, up until recently, maybe, because what just recently happened, I know this is going down a rabbit trail a little bit, but just recently, it got dropped onto, I think, like HBO Max or something.
Yes, yeah.
And what it has happened with that is that you now do have some younger folks who are just coming across it and checking it out. That prior to that, I mean, just the last 25, 30 years, Logan's Run has kind of just disappeared off the map. For a while, it was hard to even find copies of it on video, and then they remastered it, they put it on a Blu-ray.
Yeah,
There was a nice little resurgence amongst cinephiles, and now it's starting to
and you know,
reach
Bill had a
people,
lot. Bill
you know.
had a lot to do with that. William Nolan. He petitioned. George didn't petition as hard. You know, the character was created by William F. Nolan, and then he got George to help him write it. But George didn't write the sequels. And George Clayton Johnson told me, I won't get into it now, but it's a movie we should probably cover eventually.
Yeah.
That he told me a lot of cool stories, some of which y'all might have heard, some maybe not. We were at the San Diego Comic-Con. It was the one where I first met Wynn and the Walt Newton guys in 2006. And I started hanging out with this other guy who knew George Clayton Johnson, and me and George Clayton Johnson sat in this lobby overlooking the, you know, enormous dealer's room, and he just started smoking blunts. I mean, he this was right before they were legal there, but he did not give a damn. He was 77. His hair was like this. His hair was like this. You know, he was wearing a purple shirt and a vest that had. He looked kind of like Dave Brock and Charles Manson had a kid, you know, and it was awesome.
Logan's Run is that funny example. I mean, we talk about franchises and things, and what I miss from sci-fi movies in the 70s is when they used to make them and then they would remake them as TV shows. So they did like the Logan's Run TV show, the Planet of the Apes TV show,
exactly.
you know, tons of that stuff, and they were never ever as good,
The
you know,
show,
as the actual, or even like before the HBO Westworld, there was Beyond Westworld. I think was the TV movie that they tried to do, and that sort of thing. But
I feel like the Logan TV series is part of what killed the hype.
Probably,
you know, but the Marvel comic adaptation, since we all know so much about comic books,
early George Perez, and it was nice. It was stuff.
David Anthony Kraft wrote it, George Perez pencil, and Klaus Janson inked it.
Klaus Janson,
art is incredible, and it's different than the movie. I personally, this is my opinion, I find the movie rather shallow compared to the novel. The novel to me is very deep. The novel's very deep. The novel's adult. It's like a hard R / NC-17. The movie
Logan's Run itself is rated PG, the movie, but it probably nowadays would be re-rated R, based on that orgy sequence.
Yes.
You know, but yes, the movie brought me to the comic, which brought me to the novel. So anyway, but that's a whole nother show.
Same thing.
That's a whole nother show.
We're not covering Logan's Run. We did a good job.
We're talking ZARDOZ, and Richard's telling us all about ZARDOZ.
Sorry, it was
okay. The last thing I'll say about ZARDOZ is, I brought up Logan's Run because, you know, after that was the last gasp of major studios trying to approach science fiction from the cerebral perspective.
I agree.
You know, as we know, Star Wars changed everything. Thanks to Star Trek and Star Wars, most science fiction is in part always military science fiction.
Yeah.
Almost always. There's always elements of militarism, you know, but that era, the early 70s, it wasn't like that. They were going down all kinds of different avenues. They were thinking of different approaches. And you know, ZARDOZ did help put the nail into the coffin of cerebral science fiction. Yeah. Although I loved the film, you know, audiences at the time did not. You know?
I made a list of what I thought is alternative science fiction, which I never posted on the group. I mean, this is at the very beginning when I had the idea, even before I told Kaylin. I told her, and she was immediately like, "Okay, we're doing that." And I'm like, "Okay." And you know, my ZARDOZ was on it. Obviously, a lot of movies we're going to cover tonight were on it. Some movies we've covered before, like that are in the post-apocalypse. Idaho Transfer, which me and Scott basically have I think it's some of the best work Scott did with us. I mean, basically it's me and Scott having this super in-depth discussion about this movie nobody's heard or cares about, even Peter Fonda. And it got 150 views and it's still getting likes. And I'm like, I know it has a pretty girl in the graphic, but I also think people saw Peter Fonda's Lost movie and maybe were curious. But that's definitely an alternative science. The Creation of the Humanoids would have fit in perfectly.
Another great one that we just watched that Vinegar Syndrome just put out is the movie Phase 4 that Saul
Oh,
Bass
yeah.
directed.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Which
yeah.
which I actually was going
love
to
it.
cover, then decided not to. But
Yeah,
I had
me
watched it for the first time, and it was I was really impressed by it. I thought it was very
Yeah.
like weird and
I thought about
trippy,
that. It's
and
I'm
been so long
thinking-
since I've seen it.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
thinking,
yeah.
well, I've just watched that maybe 2 months ago. It's one of those I watched repeatedly so much. But
yeah,
yeah, Phase 4, I think, deserves a different topic because there's a blending of surrealism and science
yeah.
fiction in that one that
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
almost is a different category
It-
than
it
just
almost-
alternative sci-fi.
It almost kind of, well, in a way, it's a Mondo movie also with the story because it and the Hellstrom Chronicle both came
Hellstrom.
out.
Hellstrom. Yeah, see, we
Yeah.
need to do both of those in the
We
same
could
show.
finally had the science to see all the insects. So all the
Yeah.
insect footage, those actors are real. They're not actors.
Yeah.
They're not professional actors.
Another kind of weird sci-fi one that is like Phase 4. It's not quite as good. Is that movie Chosen Survivors? Have any of you seen that movie?
Yeah,
No,
I
I
don't,
don't
I
know.
don't think it's,
It's the group of
nearly
people
as
they're
good, but
they're
it's
put
fun.
into a bunker. They're put into like a bunker because because it's supposed to be the end of the world, and they're selected as like the most excellent people that are supposed to repopulate planet Earth. And it turns out it's a fake government experiment. But basically, to make a long story short, a bat who's like rabid or a flock of bats gets into their bunker and starts like causing all this havoc. It's very funny, but it kind of is this in the same vein as Phase 4. It's not quite as executed as well, but it's kind of this really weird, like post-apocalyptic creature feature, kind of animal revenge movie, kind of all thrown into.
I feel
into
like
one
Phase
thing.
4, if Phase 4 had the distribution, it had the
Yeah.
stars. If it had the distribution, a bigger distribution,
Mhm.
I feel like, what was I going to say? I was going to say that, the Hellstrom Chronicles kind of sank and Phase 4 was like a little blip, but,
Mhm.
but I feel like if they had maybe marketed it less as just a straight sci-fi action
Yeah.
horror and just a little marketing of the Mondo and cerebral and
Yeah.
people like my dad loved
Yeah.
that stuff. The UFOs were popular.
Yeah.
That, I
Yeah.
think it would have been a bigger hit.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that was a flaw. And again, this is probably a whole nother show, but Phase 4, part of the marketing flaw was, your average Joe on the street just thought, oh, it's a Empire of the Ants,
Right.
or
Yes.
whatever. And
That's
no,
actually
this was-
initially what I thought
was-
that it was.
yeah,
and
this
I
is
watched it,
way
it
more
wasn't that.
cerebral than that,
Mhm.
and beyond cerebral, it's surreal.
It is.
And
Yes,
that
yes.
the Saul Bass visuals and stuff, especially the original ending, is worth
Mhm.
watching. If you haven't
Oh,
seen
yeah.
that, go on
That's the one I
YouTube
have
and check it out.
Blu-ray also.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so Richard, I wanted to make
Rich-
a comment. You
okay.
were talking about militarism real quick. There is an article, I think it's either from 1978 or 1979. It's like right after the first Star Wars comes out. And the name of the article, taken from Robert Heinlein, is Starship Troopers. And it's all about militarism and fascism and jingoism in science fiction and kind of how that carries over, like even from the 60s, even as far as back as Asimov had done some things, that were kind of militaristic and that sort of thing. And you look at a lot
Asimov
of
was a
fans.
right-winger.
Yeah. And well, you look at a lot of like science fiction fans nowadays and how they're stuck in kind of that, mode of thinking as well. So it's interesting. We're talking about kind of the more cerebral ones. It's just interesting to see how many, sci-fi fans have kind of gone down that path in some ways.
I think the
Yeah.
kind of stuff we're talking about, thanks to the internet, Blu-ray, YouTube,
Yeah.
they're getting a second appraisal.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to do a video about this subject
Mhm.
when I first started doing videos.
You could do several videos
I
about
did
the subject. Yeah,
I did a
it's-
couple of movies individually, but
Mhm.
when I thought about, Caitlin's like, "What are you going to do next?" And I'm like, "Hey, I have this idea. It's perfect for a group,
Mhm.
especially a group our age range."
Mhm.
So, Richard, did you have any concluding thoughts on Zardoz?
No, not really. But one thing that popped into my head in this conversation is that something I would have liked to have covered was the final program.
Yeah,
But
but
Mhm.
you
the
haven't
Derek
seen it.
Cornelius film, but I haven't seen that since probably since
Yeah, we can't
1980.
cover ones we haven't seen.
Well, yeah, it's been so long. I've seen it, but
that's
I forgot it.
another rule.
But yeah, it's like when I first got into science fiction. Speaking of the military stuff, there was a schism. There was a right wing and there was a left wing. And the left wing was probably more prevalent because the right wing was kind of filtering out, the Heinlein, and
Mhm.
even their right wing wasn't like the right wing now. It was more
Right.
libertarian and
Right.
really kind of different. I didn't disagree with a lot of things they said, even though I am very left wing myself. But they had what they called the new wave, which was Michael Moorcock. That's why I brought up
Yeah.
Jerry Cornelius.
Yeah.
J.G.
And-
Ballard,
Yeah, J.G. Ballard
and
and
Philip
the
Jose
New
Farmer.
World's,
Yeah. Yeah.
New
Yeah.
World's magazine.
Zelazny,
it.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But anyway, I'm
that's a
done with
great list.
ZARDOZ. I'll let somebody else talk for a while.